A long time ago in a Toys R Us in Sacramento, California, a young Resurretro with his mom, dad, and siblings went to buy a Christmas present. But not just any present, a Super Nintendo. The first game my dad bought for us? Super Star Wars. And Star Wars needs no introduction. It's a global phenomenon started by George Lucas in the 1970s. You might have heard of it. The likes of Darth Vader intrigued me. Luke was my favorite character. The farm boy who became a hero. Chewbacca. And his sidekick Han Solo. And also Princess Leia. You get the gist. Many a game were made for the series, but the one I played the most was released in 1992 for the SNES. Developed by LucasArts and Sculptured Software. The game features a run-and-gun style, where you start off in the Dune Sea as Luke, fighting scorpions, womp rats, flying creatures, and finally at the end of the level, the Sarlacc pit. Which is pretty head-scratching because it doesn't appear until Return of the Jedi, but more on that later. I remember as a kid having a difficult time beating the first level, so my siblings and I asked my dad to beat the game for us, and we all sat around my parents' bed, cheering as he passed through all the levels. The game offers a set of difficulties, such as Easy Mode, which is the favorite of speedrunners, Brave Mode, which is medium difficulty, obviously, and finally, if you're feeling really dangerous, there is Jedi Mode. But overall, I think the game is pretty fair. It is a challenge, except for one boss, the lava monster, which is in the Sandcrawler, and probably one of George's crazy special edition add-ons that were scrapped. But I don't know for sure, it's just kind of a joke that I made up. But it was frustrating, and I found out you could actually skip him by scrolling the camera up at a certain point, which is pretty helpful for the speedrun. The reason this level is so difficult is because if you jump or fall into the lava, it's an automatic death. I don't recommend doing this, but to each their own. But there is a pixel where you could jump out without taking any damage, which is weird because I've seen it happen, but I don't know how it works. Before that, though, you make your way up the Sandcrawler. I forgot to mention this level, but I'll mention it now. You have to climb up the Sandcrawler, and if you fall down, you gotta restart the whole thing. I mean, you don't die, but it's highly annoying. Oh, and there's also a time limit, which thankfully is a feature that is gone from future installments. You ride around in a speeder and shoot Jawas. Yes, Luke was so bummed out in the film that the Empire slaughtered the Jawas, but now seeing the game, he's not too far removed from his murderous father. He goes on to slaughter the Tusken Raiders like animals, but at least leaves the women and the children, so he's a little bit better than Daddy.
They're like animals, and I slaughtered them like animals. I hate them.
After that, you make your way to Mos Eisley and pick up none other than Chewbacca, whose health bar is way bigger than Luke's and also starts off with a better blaster pickup. You go into the cantina and hear the epic theme music while picking up blaster power-ups and blasting your way through spinning aliens. Aliens who jump out of nowhere. And pick up health swords because the next boss is pretty difficult. The blaster power-ups feature a heat seeker, which was my favorite until I realized how overpowered the plasma gun was. There's an ion cannon also, but for all intents and purposes, stick with the plasma gun at all cost. After defeating the green monster and turning him into that chess piece you see in the film, you escape from Mos Eisley and make your way to the Death Star, where TIE fighters are trying to push you into the pits. That's a big runway because those ships are pretty huge and they're flying through that whole thing. But I will advise, once you get Chewbacca, just keep on using him throughout the game. And you might be asking why. Where is Luke? Where is Han? What about the lightsaber that Luke got from Obi-Wan, who sliced off his dad's legs, an arm, and took it from him? And to that I say, Luke's lightsaber sucks. It's hard to get anywhere with it except a few select levels. He doesn't obtain it until he scales an auto-scroller, where bad things are trying to knock you off breaking platforms. Yes, breaking platforms on an auto-scroller where things are trying to push you off. Which is by far the most infuriating part of the game. In all honesty, Han is no better. So stick to the hero of the game, Chewbacca. But back to the Death Star, where you fight a robot boss that looks like every other robot in every other game after RoboCop came out, and then being thrust into the detention center where things try to crush you. Little cars try to push you into those crushers. There are alien robot things that drop giant health pickups, and you must destroy a ship before rescuing the princess, who is in another... No, she's not in another castle. This is not Mario Brothers. She's in there, don't worry. You've seen the film. Afterwards, you scale a large tower on moving platforms where you destroy a tractor beam, which Obi-Wan forgot to turn off because he's having a reunion with his apprentice, Darth Vader, who is secretly Luke's father, but don't tell anyone. You then blast off to the Death Star. Actually, you go to Yavin 5 first. And then you blast off to the Death Star, take on TIE fighters and towers, destroying 20 of them before being thrown into a trench, where you're confronted by more TIE fighters and giant orbs that you can just shoot to avoid damage, before taking on Darth Vader himself, where you have to dodge, dip, dive, and dodge, and fight. But once he's defeated, you'll fly for a little longer, then hear Obi-Wan say, "Use the Force, Luke." The game pauses, and you have to fire torpedoes at the right time unless you want to play the last two levels again. But if you hit the right spot, the torpedoes are shown going into the Death Star, and... kaboom! Great shot, kid! That was 1 in a million. Cut to the end, where Chewie, who did the most work, doesn't receive his medal, and the game ends. The overall graphics of the game were okay. I mean, just okay. They're grainy and not a graphical masterpiece in any way, but I can tell who everyone is, and the landscapes look very nice for a title from the early 90s. I would say the sound was the best part of the game, and Paul Webb was in charge of converting the original score from the film onto the system's 8-channel sound chip. I feel he did a really good job of capturing the film's musical elements and putting them into the video game. But the songs get old after a while, hearing them over and over. But I guess in every video game that happens when you have to replay parts. An issue of Electronic Gaming Monthly featured images of level designs from the trash compactor scene like you see in the original film. But the level was ultimately cut from the final product because the developers ran out of cartridge space. It's a shame because I feel you could have replaced the sandcrawler levels, which had no bearing on the film whatsoever, and the trash compactor was way more important to the overall plot of the movie. A PC port developed by Brainbug was in the works and had neared completion, but the project was scrapped in 1995 by LucasArts, even after the game had been well into playtesting. There is a leak on the internet, at least there may or may not be. I don't advocate piracy, so don't go looking for it. Again, I say, don't go looking for it. And for a last time, I say, don't go looking for it. Also in 2020, an early prototype of a version for the Mega Drive was leaked onto the internet. Or it may not be. Again, don't advocate piracy. It was developed to that point, but canceled in 1993 for unknown reasons. And again, I say, I am iterating this. Don't go looking for it. But I do have to wonder what the port might have looked like, because Aladdin, Scooby-Doo Mystery, and other games were vastly different from their Super Nintendo counterpart. Overall, Super Star Wars is a fine game. It was ranked as an average game for the SNES, and I would have to agree. And as much as I love it, and it was a big part of my childhood, it was just okay. I feel like Luke doesn't play a big part of it. Han is basically unusable, and using up to flip makes it harder for new players. Unless you know what you're doing. Obviously, that was a stupid line, but whatever. Musically, I think it's a fantastic score, but can get a little boring hearing the same songs over and over. And the graphics, like I said, are just alright. Nothing great. I will say that the final battle in the trench of the Death Star is pretty cool, and it's one of the highlights of the game, especially when you defeat Darth Vader and fire the torpedoes into the main reactor. But I would have liked a little more variety to the rest of it. What do you think? Let me know in the comments if my assessment was fair, incorrect, or just crazy. Super Star Wars: The Empire Strikes Back was released in North America in 1993 and was the SNES's best-selling game in the United Kingdom in 1994. Unfortunately for me, it was the only one in the trilogy that I didn't own, but played at a friend's house. Be though as it may, it was my dream to own the whole trilogy, and finally, last year I achieved that goal. Just like the first game, it's your standard run and gun, but with improvements in the control. For instance, the game now features a double jump, which takes away the pain of having to hold up when wanting to go higher. Luke now has the ability to deflect projectiles, which makes him more of a viable option, as well as his ability to use force powers, but more on that later. Obviously, no introduction is needed for the films, but I will say that Empire Strikes Back and A New Hope are perhaps my favorite films in the franchise. And if you ask me on certain days, it's 1A or 1B. It just depends. So it's natural that the SNES would feature not one, not two, but 3 games, which I will review throughout the video. The game starts out just like the film, where they roll the screen crawl, and the theme plays, just like the last game, which I forgot to mention. It also features cutscenes from various points in the film. The first part of the game is like a maze, which I don't have a problem with, and Luke does float in the air where you can find hidden power-ups, which I think may be the start of his hidden abilities, but I'm not sure. Another thing that confused me was the start and stop nature of the levels. You would reach a certain point, then the level would end, and instead of going to the next part, it would start up and you would just keep going. I'm not a coding genius, so I wouldn't know the technicalities, but when I first played it, I didn't know what to think. In the middle of the first act, as I will call it, you fight the snow beast, which doesn't look like what we got in the film. But if you see the unbutchered editions of the films, we see very little of him in the first place, so I can see where they took creative liberties. After traversing a cave, you find yourself back outside, avoiding different creatures before fighting a probe droid who has 2 phases, one where it shoots projectiles, and which makes use of Luke's blocking abilities, as long as the platforms don't sink into the water too far where eels try to electrocute you. And the other is where it tries to throw its big lumbering body at you, a la Goldberg in WCW. I would say that he is one of the easier bosses to fight, but getting there is pretty difficult. And that is the polarizing part of the whole experience. The game is considered one of the hardest on the Super Nintendo, according to some people, and I would have to agree. I didn't do a challenge run, and I still had a difficult time beating it, and it took multiple streams to do so. Just like the other games, there are 3 difficulties: easy, brave, and Jedi. I didn't have the heart to play on Jedi mode. It was too hard. But after the caves, you end up on the base where Luke is trying to get to his ship, and stormtroopers, giant spider robots, and bombs all try to impede your progress. The roof falls on you and causes damage, which can be annoying, and even on the easiest difficulty, I died a lot. Call me a coward, but this game is by far one of the hardest I have ever played. You then switch to your ship, where you are transported to the Battle of Hoth, which features a Mode 7 quasi-3D vehicle battle, where you attack probes, speeders, and after taking a number of them out, you have to take out some AT-STs. And finally, using your tow cable, you must defeat 5 AT-ATs, which was no easy feat, and I felt the level was very disorienting, which I can attribute to the limited technology of the SNES at the time. You then board the last AT-AT and blow it up by deflecting its projectiles back at it, and switch to Han Solo, where he and the others try to escape Hoth on the Millennium Falcon. As Han Solo, you basically replay the whole Hoth base again, fighting an AT-ST, blasting off to space, going to an asteroid field, destroying 10 TIE fighters while avoiding damage, and then you transition back to Luke, where he's in Dagobah trying to find Yoda and save R2. I mentioned Force power-ups earlier, but this is the part of the game where you actually have to find them, and they are difficult to find casually, and only 2 of them are useful: Force Heal and Force Levitation. Force Heal is most helpful when fighting the Dagobah boss, which is a giant monster where you have to take out its limbs before doing damage. I don't even know what it is because it's nowhere in the movies. And again, I'm probably thinking that it's one of George's rejected special edition plans. Paul Webb was again the sound engineer and transposed the music to the SNES, and felt he did a wonderful job of capturing the essence of the franchise. But hearing the Imperial March over and over can get a little tedious, and I wish they would have added other songs from the film to accompany it. We then get transported to Cloud City, and using Chewie and Han Solo, we rescue 3PO after fighting a giant ship manned by one of the trash guys from the film, before Han Solo battles the Carbonite machine, which was a strange move to change the details from the film in my opinion. Chewie then fights Boba Fett, which I hear the first phase can be skipped by sliding at the right time. But I didn't know how to do it, so I settled for spitting at him until he transports to his ship, and rinse repeat, and he's done. I left out the detail that every character in the game now has sub-weapons. Han has bombs that he throws at enemies, Luke has multiple in the form of his blaster and force powers, and Chewie has a spin that makes him invincible and able to damage any enemy. The game deviates from the plot a little bit, but not too bad. I guess it made it easier to develop and also more fun. I say this because Luke travels to Cloud City and attacks cloud cars to reach the final level, And because the way the graphics are set up, it's hard to see where they are, and they do massive damage. I found myself trying to beat the level over and over, but at least I didn't have to use a password, which is a staple in all 3 games, and I forgot to mention again. When you game over, Yoda says, "Do or do not. There is no try." But it's not Frank Oz, and Vader is not James Earl Jones. They're voiced by Clint Bajakian and Peter McConnell, respectively. Finally, we reached the final level, and it was so annoying being knocked off ledges by stormtroopers, and it wasn't until I found the Force levitation that I just floated to the end of the level, where you combat Darth Vader in multiple phases. I found him to be pretty easy, and the final phase gives you Force pickups, which was nice, and afterwards, the message reads that I defeated Darth Vader and saved the galaxy, which makes absolutely no sense because it leaves out the fact that Luke gets his butt handed to him and literally disarmed. There was no reason for the deviation. I mean, the film came out 13 years prior, and everyone knows what happened. But overall, the game is like its predecessor. Nothing too fancy, fun in some parts, but some parts are very tedious. It's a great challenge. It's one of the more difficult games for the system. The graphics are about the same as the first installment, and the music can drive you crazy if you have to play the same stage over and over. And don't get me wrong, I love Star Wars, but I can only stand a song for so long. Luke is still not the most useful, and Chewbacca overpowers everyone, which is alright, but if the main character isn't good, then it's kind of unfortunate. But overall, I think it's a game I can pick up and play every once in a while. Super Star Wars Return of the Jedi was released in 1994 and followed the same formula as the first 2 games. Running and gunning. And if you ask Kid Me, Return of the Jedi was my favorite Star Wars film. So much so that I rewound the VHS tape to the part where Luke fights Darth Vader and practiced the fight over and over, much to the annoyance of all the adults in the room. I wanted to be Luke Skywalker, a farm boy who became a Jedi Knight. But just like the other installments, Luke is very underpowered, and even more so because they took out the Force elevation. I guess I can see why, and made some of the platforming non-existent in Empire Strikes Back. You start off flying a ship on Tatooine, where you're avoiding rocks and pits, trying to get to Jabba's palace. After that, the level takes you to a cryptic maze where you avoid monsters, rocks, machines, and if you're playing for the first time, you'll be wandering a lot. If you fall, you may or may not land in a different area, or you just might die. It all depends on your luck. It takes a lot of concentration to remember where you are, where you're going, and where you have been. My suggestion is to keep to the high ground, and you'll be fine. Eventually, you find your way to the orb that sits in front of Jabba's palace, and you have to destroy it. Inside the palace, you fight many Rancors, pick up blaster power-ups, avoid trapdoors that send you to your death. There's an amazing soundbite where these green alien girls jump around yelling, "Ooh-ah! Ooh-ah!" And that would make my siblings and I laugh so much, and even to this day when we're playing the game and we see them, we laugh and we mock them or imitate them. There are other alien creatures like the ones that grab you and drain health, or Salacious Crumb, the tiny pet of Jabba, who can impede your progress. Salacious Crumb can be annoying, because every time you hit him, he goes, but once you make your way through the chaos, you fight Jabba's lackey, the one with the butt head. who teleports about and shoots orbs at you. It's really hard to review a game that is almost identical to its predecessors, and I felt while playing this recently that if it wasn't for having the Star Wars name, it would have been long forgotten, or at least that is my opinion. You make your way through a dungeon, fight a frog creature, then you're thrust into another cryptic level, where you try to find the Rancor, all while trying to avoid bats, pits that shoot fireballs at you and push you back, which can be highly annoying and drain most of your life. Alligator skulls snap at you and clamp down on you, but luckily there are health pickups before you fight the monster, who slams his fist to dislodge rocks at you and shoots fireballs, which is new to me because the Rancor never did that in the film, but I digress. One of the cooler levels is the part where you have to platform on moving ships to get into Jabba's palace. And it's one where I feel Luke is the right character to use and is actually my choice because I always wanted things to line up with the film. Which is why in the next level, I use Princess Leia to defeat Jabba. She uses her chain and does a spin move that is so useful, and after the climactic battle, you have Endor, and the speeder level was brutally hard for me as a kid. It was another game my dad had to beat for us. You dodge trees and enemy speeders while trying to destroy 10 of them, and afterwards, you meet the Ewok and play as Wicket, whose only weapon is a bow and arrow, but if you shoot them in the tree, you can actually use them as a trampoline. And I always found it embarrassing that a little cuddly teddy bear could take out a stormtrooper, but in the game, they at least got that spot on in the film. There is one log that was the bane of my existence because the wrong timing could land you into a watery grave and you have to start from a checkpoint. That is, if you grab the R2 unit. Yes, the checkpoints are no longer automatic, which isn't ideal, and I think it was an addition that could have been left out to make the game a little better. Afterwards, you separate Luke from the others, just like the film, where he tries to find Darth Vader, while fighting ships, bad platforms, robots. The platforms don't always spawn, but afterwards is the Death Star shield level, and it's one of the worst concoctions in a game, at least in my opinion. There's beams that fire at you, turrets that annoyingly drain life, and a section where you shoot blocks to make it through, but if you take the wrong path, you fall to your death. It's like pick a path on an illegal substance. Unfortunately, this game is the weakest in the series, and it isn't until you fight Darth Vader and Emperor Palpatine at the tail end of the game where it gets pretty good. But then it turns into a race to the Death Star where walls, TIE fighters, and fire all try to kill you. But after that, the game ends. It has the original song from the non-special edition films and Sebastian Shaw as Anakin Skywalker before George changed it to Hayden Christensen, which I think is better anyways. The music was again transposed by Paul Webb, and it's good, but just like the other games, it becomes overplayed and annoying. The graphics didn't change much, except for a few sprites and backgrounds, but I feel the magic was gone by this point. And even though I love the memories I had with it, and how much it meant to me as a child, and just the memories with my dad and my siblings, it fell very flat recently when I played it. It's not one that I really want to come back to often. I do feel Super Star Wars is the best in the series. It was new and fresh, but by the time you get to Return of the Jedi, there isn't much improvement you can make in the games, and I think that hurts the series as a whole. GamePro had this same problem. The bosses were too easy, and it felt like a retread of the other games. Just chalk it off as the law of diminishing return. Thank you for watching this review. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and hit that bell to see more content. And check me out on twitch.tv/RezoRetro, where I play the games I review. Adios.